Good morning or good evening, whenever you happen to be watching this. It's an absolute privilege for me to share with you in this first episode of Inside Out TV. And I want to talk to you this morning about contentment. Interesting word. It means to be at peace regardless of the situation in which you find yourself, which is countercultural. Most times, if there's an event or a circumstance that is unpleasant, we're not at peace, and that if things are going well for us, we are at peace. So there's a secret about being content in any and every circumstance. And Paul says to the Philippian church in Philippians chapter 4 that he's found this secret. So we want to find out about this secret that Paul had, see if we can get it too, and let that contentment be a real blessing in the communities in which we live and find ourselves, because there's a lot of angst right now. Perhaps you're feeling it personally, perhaps your family is suffering in some way, your neighbours, other people that you care about and love. And if we can find this secret that Paul found, then that's going to be a real blessing to us and to many others. So he says, I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I've learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. So Paul had known both plenty, which means to abound, to overflow, to such a degree that you've got way more than what you need. Okay, so he knew that extreme, and he also knew what it was to be in need, to not have food actually. He talks about being hungry, he talks about sleepless nights, he talks about being shipwrecked and being under arrest. He talks about being in lockdown. So there were a number of needs that Paul talks about where he lacked. He talks about lacking, and he talks about plenty. He'd known both extremes, he'd known everything in between, and yet he'd learned the secret of being content in any and every situation. That word secret is interesting. It means to be initiated into the mysteries. It means to enter into a knowledge about something that isn't automatic. It's something that comes over time. And I think of the Aboriginal communities, traditional Aboriginal communities, and how the young men who basically pass from childhood to adulthood through a process of initiation. And through that process, that they became initiated into the secrets. So in terms of having faith in God, we can have a childlike faith in God, or we can be initiated into the secret of being content, and we can have an adult faith in God. Because a childlike faith in God goes like this: if things are going well for me, I'm happy. You know what kids are like. If things are going well for me, I'm happy. If things aren't going good for me, I'm sad and I'm annoyed and I'm frustrated. That's a childlike response. But when you become an adult in the faith, which doesn't just happen instantly, it's something that you learn over time. And how do you learn it? For Paul, he learnt it by experiencing both extremes. So adversity and plenty are both opportunities of learning to be content in whatever the situation is that you face. And if things are always going well for us, if we're always living in plenty, we'll never learn the secret of being content in any and every situation. And what is the secret? The secret is, Paul says in verse 13, I can do all this through him who gives me strength. So whatever situation I might face, I can do it all through him who gives me strength. I'm not relying on my own capacity or my own provision or my own employment or my own ability to create a happy circumstance. I'm relying on him who gives me strength. And in verse 19, he says to the Philippians, and my God will meet all your needs according to the riches of his glory in Christ Jesus. So he's comforting them that this same God who has provided contentment and strength and peace to him can also supply their needs, can provide for them. A little bit earlier in chapter 4, verse 6 I think it is, Paul says in verse 5, let your gentleness be evident to all. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything. So we can be salt and light in our communities by having an experience of contentment, an experience of trust in God, such that there's a gentleness in our character and in our demeanour, in our conversation with others. There's a gentleness, there's a peace, and there's a contentment which is both attractive and sometimes offensive. It's not always welcome, this contentment, but it is a gentleness that is evident to all and is a real witness to others. And in this season in which we find ourselves, if we're going to live as inside out people of God, then on the very inside of our hearts and our lives, we need this trust that God is our Father, that Christ will strengthen us in any and every situation, and that God will provide for our needs out of the riches of his glory. Perhaps not the needs that we think should be provided for, but certainly the needs that he knows that we have. And it doesn't mean subscribing to a life of poverty where we live just a poor life so that God can meet our needs. There are seasons when life is plentiful, but our trust doesn't rest either in poverty or in riches. Our trust rests in God, that in every and any situation, he is able to supply our needs. He is able to give us his peace, and he's able to guard our hearts, and he's able to give us contentment. And our God is not tied to circumstances, whether they be good or bad. Our God is faithful like the rising of the sun every day. And I hope those words encourage you and those around you. See you for now.